She stepped out of the shower wrapped in steam and the thin white towel she'd owned since college, the one fraying at the corners like it was tired of holding together. Water slid down her calves and gathered on the tile, quiet as breath. The bathroom mirror was fogged, her face only a suggestion behind it, eyes softened by blur. For a moment she stood still, listening to the house settle. Pipes ticking. A distant car. The ordinary music of a life that had always returned to itself. She walked barefoot down the hall, leaving small wet crescents behind her. The bedroom door was open. It always was. He hated closed doors, said they made rooms feel secretive. She smiled at the thought, a reflex that arrived late and stayed too long. The smell reached her first. Not his soap. Something floral, sharp. A stranger's shampoo, heavy and confident. She slowed. Her heart did not race. It paused, as if waiting for instructions. On the bed sat a woman she had never seen before, legs folded beneath her, hair still damp and darker at the ends. The woman wore nothing but a pale blue shirt she recognized instantly, because she had folded it that morning. On the duvet between them lay a manila envelope, thick, open, its contents squared neatly like they'd been measured. The woman looked up. Not startled. Almost relieved. "I didn't know when you'd come out," she said, softly. Her voice was careful, like someone walking across ice. The towel tightened in her hands. Her name hovered somewhere behind her teeth but refused to come out. She felt suddenly very cold. "I'm sorry," the woman added, and placed a hand over the envelope. "I didn't want this to be cruel." Cruel. The word passed through her without stopping. She thought of the shampoo bottle on the shelf, still warm. Of the way her husband hummed when he cooked eggs. Of the years stacked behind her like boxes she'd never labeled. "Where is he?" she asked, surprised at the steadiness of her voice. "Downstairs," the woman said. "He couldn't stay." She nodded. She understood that part immediately. He had always left rooms before they finished speaking. She stepped closer, each footfall deliberate. The bedspread dipped under her weight when she sat, careful to keep distance. The envelope waited between them, an animal pretending to sleep. The woman slid it forward. There signed. On his end. She did not touch it. Paper had never frightened her before, but now it felt loud. She studied the woman's hands instead. No rings. Short nails. A faint scar near the thumb, white and old. Someone who had lived a life before entering hers. "How long?" she asked. The woman hesitated. Counted silently. Long enough to stop pretending it would end quietly. A laugh escaped her. Small. Broken. It surprised them both. "I washed my hair twice," she said. "Because I thought I'd missed a spot." The woman blinked, confusion flickering, then understanding. She looked down. "I know this is not enough. But I wanted you to see me. Not hear about me." The house creaked. Somewhere downstairs a floorboard answered back, then went still. He was listening. Of course he was. She stood. The towel slipped slightly, and she caught it without thinking. Muscle memory from a marriage of catching things before they fell. She walked to the window. Outside, the maple tree leaned the way it always had, leaves trembling, unsure whether to stay. She pressed her forehead to the glass. It was cool. Honest. "I thought," she said slowly, "that if it ever happened, I'd scream. Or collapse. Or become someone else entirely." The woman said nothing. "But I'm still me," she whispered. "And that feels like the worst part." Silence stretched. It filled the room like water rising. "I'll go," the woman said at last, standing. She folded the shirt carefully, reverently, as if it were a flag. "He wanted to talk to you alone." She nodded again. She was very good at nodding today. At the door, the woman paused. "He loved you," she said, as if offering proof. "I don't think he knew how to stay." The door closed. Footsteps receded. A life exited her bedroom carrying someone else's apology. She remained by the window, towel damp and heavy, hair dripping onto the sill. Downstairs, the front door opened. Closed. The house exhaled. She turned back to the bed. The envelope waited, patient. She sat beside it, finally touching the edge with one finger. It did not bite. She did not open it yet. She lay down instead, curling around the empty space where her body had always fit, breathing in the wrong scent, letting the ceiling blur. She counted each breath until the room stopped spinning. And in the quiet, she realized the day would not end. It would simply continue without asking her permission. She did not sleep. Night moved through the house without her, touching rooms she could not enter. She lay on the bed fully dressed now, robe still knotted, the envelope on the nightstand like a small authority she hadn't elected. Every time she closed her eyes, her body flinched awake again, bracing for impact that never came. Silence pressed against her ears until it rang. At some point the clock changed hours. She noticed because the red numbers felt accusatory, as if time itself were asking what she planned to do with the rest of it. She turned on her side and stared at the faint outline where his pillow had been. It still held the shallow bowl of his head. She pressed her hand there, not tenderly, just to test whether absence had weight. It did. Morning arrived thin and grey. The light crept in carefully, like it knew it wasn't welcome. She rose when her joints stiffened, when staying still began to feel like surrender. In the bathroom, she brushed her teeth without tasting the paste. Her face in the mirror looked the same, which felt like a betrayal. She had expected some visible sign. A crack. A warning. Downstairs, the house smelled stale, as if it had been holding its breath all night and finally let go. She opened windows. Cold air rushed in, sharp and cleansing. It moved papers on the counter, lifted the corner of the envelope where she had left it. She pinned it down with her palm until the room settled. She made coffee out of habit. The machine gurgled and hissed. The sound was almost comforting until she remembered how he used to stand behind her, chin on her shoulder, stealing the first sip. She poured the mug full and let it sit untouched. The steam rose and disappeared. Another thing leaving without permission. The phone rang mid-morning. The sound startled her so badly she laughed, a short, bright noise that felt wrong in her mouth. She let it ring once more before answering. Her sister's voice came through, already thick with concern. "He called me," she said. Not a question. "Yes," she replied. Saying it out loud felt like signing something she hadn't read. "Oh," her sister said. A pause. Then, "I'm coming." "You don't have to." "I know." They did not talk much after that. There was nothing to explain that wouldn't sound rehearsed. She hung up and stood in the kitchen, unsure where to put her hands. Everything in the house had been chosen together. Even the mistakes. She opened the envelope again at noon. This time she read every word. The language was precise, impersonal. It spoke of division and assets and timelines. It did not mention mornings. It did not mention how he tucked the blanket under her feet when she fell asleep on the couch. It did not mention the way love could thin out quietly, like fabric worn smooth. Her name appeared again and again, typed cleanly, as if it belonged to someone else. She signed nothing. She placed the papers back where they had been and closed the flap. The envelope looked unchanged, which felt unfair. In the afternoon she wandered from room to room, touching objects as if cataloguing them for loss. The dent in the wall where they had dropped the couch. The chipped mug from a road trip that had rained the entire way. The plant she kept alive out of stubbornness more than skill. Each thing asked a question she couldn't answer yet. She found one of his socks under the bed, grey, balled up, ordinary. She sat on the floor and held it until the fabric warmed in her hand. The intimacy of it undid her more than the papers had. She pressed it to her face and inhaled, then stopped, ashamed of herself, and shoved it into a drawer. She did not cry. Her body seemed to be saving that for later. Her sister arrived as dusk fell. She did not knock, just came in with the confidence of shared childhood. They stood in the entryway, looking at each other. Then her sister wrapped her arms around her and held on. The contact cracked something open. "I don't know how to do this," she said into her sister's shoulder. "I know," her sister said. "You don't have to know yet." They sat at the table and drank the coffee reheated and bitter. Her sister talked about logistics in a soft, careful voice. Lawyers. Time. Space. She nodded where appropriate. The The words floated around her like instructions for a machine she wasn't operating. That night, after her sister left, she returned to the bedroom and lay down fully clothed again. The house was quieter now, emptied of witnesses. She stared at the ceiling until her eyes burned. Finally, a single tear escaped. Then another. The sound she made was small and animal, pulled from somewhere below language. She curled onto her side and let the grief arrive at its own pace. It did not rush. It did not comfort. It simply stayed. When she slept, it was shallow and brief. She dreamed of standing in a room with no doors, holding papers that kept turning blank in her hands. She woke before dawn with the taste of salt on her lips and the certainty that nothing had been resolved. Only begun. The meeting took place in a room that smelled faintly of lemon wipes and old carpet, a room designed to hold other people's endings without absorbing them. She arrived early and chose the chair closest to the window, not for the view but for the light. She needed proof that the day was real. When he walked in, she felt it first in her chest, a familiar tightening that had once meant anticipation. Now it meant impact. He looked smaller, as if something essential had been removed without anesthesia. His hair was uncombed. He held his coat like he didn't know where to put it. They did not hug. They nodded. Politeness stepped in where intimacy used to live. "I'm glad you came," he said. She wondered who else he thought might come instead. She kept her eyes on the grain of the table, the way the laminate tried to imitate wood and failed. Their lawyer spoke first, voice calm, measured, a person whose job was to translate pain into procedure. Dates were mentioned. Options. The word amicable appeared, floated, and sank. He spoke when prompted. His voice sounded the same. That was the cruelest detail. She had expected it to break, to give her something she could recognize as remorse. Instead it moved smoothly, explaining timelines like weather. When it was her turn, she surprised herself by asking one question that had nothing to do with assets. "Did you ever think," she said, eyes still down, "that you could have told me sooner?" Silence followed. The kind that forces everyone in the room to remember they have bodies. He cleared his throat. "I thought waiting would hurt less." She nodded slowly. Not in agreement. In acknowledgement of a logic she could not inhabit. They signed nothing that day. It was labeled a discussion. They stood afterward, unsure how to end something already ending. He reached out, stopped, let his hand fall. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were careful, intact. She looked at him then, really looked. At the lines around his eyes she had traced with her thumbs in other lifetimes. At the mouth she knew in the dark. She felt no urge to forgive. No urge to punish. Only a vast, dull tiredness. "I know," she said. And meant nothing specific. Outside, the air was sharp. She breathed it in until her lungs protested. He walked her to her car. They stood there, two people waiting for a signal that would not come. "I'll email," he said. She nodded. Again. At home, she found the house rearranged by absence. His shoes gone. The coat rack lighter. She moved through the rooms like a guest, careful not to disturb the outline of what had been removed. That evening she cooked a meal for one and burned it slightly, on purpose or accident she couldn't tell. She ate standing up. The quiet pressed close, intimate as skin. Days began to stack. Each one required decisions so small they felt insulting. Which mug? Which route to work? Where to place the keys now that his were no longer beside them? She learned how much of a life was muscle memory, how grief could hide in the smallest motions. She began sorting. Boxes appeared. Some things were easy. Old receipts. Manuals. Others stalled her completely. A sweater of his, still carrying the shape of his shoulders. She sat on the floor with it in her lap and stayed there until the light changed. One afternoon, she found a note tucked into a book she hadn't opened in years. His handwriting. A grocery list. Milk. Bread. Her favorite apples. The ordinariness of it struck her harder than any confession could have. She pressed the paper flat, smoothing creases that would not disappear. She did not call him. At night, sleep came and went. Sometimes she dreamed of rooms that kept narrowing. Sometimes of water she could not reach. Once, she dreamed of standing in her bedroom while another version of herself watched from the doorway, unable to intervene. Her sister checked in. Friends circled with casseroles and careful eyes. She thanked them, ate a few bites, froze the rest. She learned to say, "I'm managing," and mean that she was still upright. Weeks passed. Papers were revised. Meetings scheduled. The language grew colder as the process continued, as if emotion had been wrung out and replaced with structure. One evening, she opened a drawer she hadn't touched since the beginning. Inside were photographs, trips, birthdays, two people learning how to stand beside each other. She sat on the bed and let herself look. She did not rush. She did not flinch. She realized then that love had not vanished all at once. It had thinned, quietly, while she was busy living inside it. She placed the photos back, closed the drawer. That night, she lay in the dark and felt the weight of the future settle, not crushing, just present. A long road without markers. She breathed. She stayed. And in the stillness before sleep, she understood that nothing would return to what it had been. Not the house. Not her name. Not even the way silence sounded. The final papers arrived on a Tuesday that felt deliberately plain. No rain. No omen. Just an envelope slid through the mail slot, a soft sound against hardwood. She picked it up and set it on the table without opening it, as if acknowledging a guest she would speak to later. She waited until evening. She always did better with endings after the light dimmed. The house felt less exposed then, less like it was watching her. She made tea. The kettle sang. She poured slowly, careful not to spill, because some habits were stubborn and still wanted protecting. At the table, she opened the envelope. The pages were heavier now, official. The signatures waited where they had always been destined to wait. She read nothing. She signed where indicated, her name flowing with a steadiness that surprised her. It looked the same as it always had. She did not. When it was done, she sat back and let her hands rest on the table. They trembled slightly, then stilled. The room did not change. The clock continued. The moment passed without ceremony. She slept deeply that night. Not well, but fully. When she woke, the dream had already slipped away, leaving only the sense that she had been somewhere else and returned alone. The weeks that followed were not dramatic. They were logistical. She moved money, changed passwords, learned how to say her new last name out loud without flinching. Sometimes she practiced it in the car, letting it echo against the windshield until it felt less like a bruise. She gave the house back to the quiet. His things had already been sorted, boxed, delivered to a place she would not visit. The rooms grew lighter without effort. Dust settled where it always had. Life did not rush to fill the space. It simply allowed it. One afternoon, she painted the bedroom a color she chose alone. A soft, uncommitted gray that held light without asking questions. She worked slowly, methodically, the brush whispering against the wall. With each stroke, the old scent faded. When she finished, she stood in the center of the room and breathed. It smelled like possibility and latex and time. She stopped waiting for messages that did not come. When her phone lit up, her body no longer braced automatically. The relief of that surprised her more than the pain ever had. She ran into him once, months later, at a grocery store 2 neighborhoods away. He was studying apples. The same apples. For a moment they stood side by side, both aware, neither turning. Then he looked at her. Really looked. There was something careful in his eyes. Something finished. "Hi," he said. "Hi. How are you?" She considered the question. "Different," she said. It felt accurate. Kind. "I'm glad," he said, and she believed he meant it. They exchanged nothing else. No explanations. No apologies. They placed their apples into separate bags and went separate ways. Outside, she leaned against her car until the shaking passed. It did not take long. That night, she cooked dinner and ate at the table, seated properly, a small candle lit for no one in particular. She noticed the way the flame moved when she breathed. She noticed the taste of salt. She noticed herself noticing. She began to make plans that did not require translation. A trip she had postponed. A class she had wanted without justification. She signed up and paid the fee and felt the clean click of commitment. Sometimes, grief still arrived without invitation. In the shower. In the middle of a sentence. It was quieter now, less demanding. She learned to let it sit beside her without explanation. It did not stay long when it was not fought. On the anniversary of nothing in particular, she took down the last photograph. She held it, studied the faces, the way they leaned toward each other without knowing how far apart they would eventually stand. She did not feel anger. Only a gentle, enduring sadness. She placed the photo in a box and sealed it. Not buried. Just finished. Late one evening, she lay in her newly painted room and listened to the house. It sounded different now. Less crowded. More honest. The silence no longer accused. It accompanied. She thought of the woman from the bed, once, briefly, without heat. She thought of him without collapse. She thought of herself as someone who had survived something unremarkable and devastating, and kept living anyway. She turned off the light and lay still. The future did not announce itself. It waited. And for the first time, she did not feel the need to rush toward it. She closed her eyes. The room held. The night passed.